You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Counterflow Podcast. Great to have you with us here for yet another week where I've got my friend Charles Haywood back on the show, fresh off of his appearance on a full Tucker Carlson special episode with just Tucker and Charles. See, Tucker Carlson and I share guests. That's how this works. So he was on a whole special with just he and Tucker, and now he's here on Counterflow. Great to have him back with us. So you probably know him. You know this name, Charles Haywood. He's the maximum leader over at The Worthy House at theworthyhouse.com. Does a lot of wonderful book reviews, and he also puts those book reviews onto a podcast form so you can hear them also. And that's actually how I listen to Charles. And it's not just book reviews. He put out this piece the other day called My Advice to the Young. And once I heard it via his podcast, I said, Charles, you got to come on Counterflow. Let's talk about this. We go over quite a bit. And if you do have a child, a teenager, anything like this, this is going to be a very valuable episode. And if you don't, and I don't, I actually find it quite valuable myself. And I think you guys are going to realize what brilliant insight Mr. Charles Haywood has. We get into all sorts of things, and let's just dive into it now. The maximum leader over at The Worthy House, Charles Haywood. Welcome back to the show, sir. How are you?
I am incredibly pleased to be here. I think last time we did this where it was the dead of winter. Now it's the height of summer. So I enjoy summer better, but I'm very happy to be here either way.
Where you're at, summer's better. Where I'm at, I'm kind of looking forward.
Yeah. Right. Indiana has nice, and August, well, I guess it's September now, but August, September, I mean, these are some fine months. So for you, maybe not so much.
Yeah, we're headed towards more pleasurable weather down here. We finally got rain. Look at us like two old people talking about the weather.
And soon it'll be our aches and pains. And,
no kidding. We'll talk about medications here in a second too. The maximum leader over at The Worthy House. Last time I had you on here, we talked about one of the themes that you talk about a lot on your podcast and write about, the post-liberal West. Before we jump in here to about your advice for young folks, the timing of this interview is good because as we record, last night was, I guess, what some people might call the Dark Brandon speech. Boy, it was something. Biden, the look of it, what he said. By the time this comes out, I assume my audience are going to be very familiar with this speech that we're talking about here. But I want to ask you about the post-liberal West, where we're at right now. And I guess first, what are your thoughts on what we saw last night, if you saw it at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Well, it's fascinating on any number of levels, and we could spend all afternoon talking about this. But yeah, we've historically focused, and I focused a lot on the post-liberal West. Weirdly, we're narrowing it down to the post-liberal America much faster than I would have considered. That is, Europe has a bunch of problems, and many of them are self-inflicted as a result of the Ukraine war and so on and so forth. But if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said that whatever collapse, catastrophe, fracture is coming is going to come to Europe first, or some set of countries in Europe. But weirdly, they seem to be plodding along in their kind of feckless way, while we are getting the full accelerationism, or as Matthew Peterson said the other day on the American Mind podcast, how I learned to stop worrying and love acceleration.
Mm-hmm.
So, I say this pretty frequently, but it keeps being more and more true. If people had told us 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, what our life politically in America would be like today, we would have thought that was just insane, and that whoever was telling us this was, a doomer or off his rocker, or someone who really needed some exposure to the outside and sunlight and get his head right. But here we are, right? So these things are, I think, in a sense, historically inevitable. One of my major themes is that the nature of the left is unable to accept any backsliding in terms of its acquisition of power. That is, once it acquires power, if it perceives, and by the left, of course, I mean the modern kind of ideological left from the French Revolution on, but rather than the classical liberal or 1950s kind of left, the modern clownish super ideological left that we see is unwilling to accept it always if it perceives that as a result of either electoral success by the right or some other set of happenings that the right is gaining power the left thought it had conquered permanently. And I would have expected them to wait until at least the 2022 election, more likely the 2024 election, to kind of really ramp up the hate level. But I actually should have predicted this, because another one of my major themes is that the current regime is incredibly clownish and fragile. If you were a competent left-wing authoritarian wannabe, you would spend your time planning out what you were going to do and engaging in a measured set of actions and laying the groundwork. You wouldn't send some senile dude out in front of like a blood red backdrop and ranting. It doesn't make any sense. Some of it makes some sense. That is, it's whipping up the base. It's hoping to have kind of create some kind of Reichstag fire kind of thing that they can use to justify the action that they're already intending on. But none of those things really matter. I mean, the regime is, it just shows how clownish and fragile the regime is. I mean, I didn't watch the whole speech. I watched snippets and I read most of it. But I actually think I was very much looking forward to the speech. I was very happy with the speech. I think that, as I like to say, I win either way. Either the speech was going to be something that was not anticipated and conciliatory. And so in that case, I would win. And if it was going to be aggressive, I would win, because then we can spin the ball forward. And of course, I got the latter, and here we are. I don't know what that means for the immediate future. My opinion is that until the economy really takes a dive, you're only going to see kind of modest conflict. But I think the actual conflict will inevitably be started by the left, and there will be some amount of violence. The only question is to what degree and to what end, and what the ultimate result of that will be.
In your podcast episode where you talk about the topic we're getting at today, your advice to the young, you started it by saying, and I like this because I agree with it, not only because I agree with it, I think it's a good thing, that within a decade, the political and social structures in America are going to be completely different. It's starting to feel like a decade's almost giving it, a longer time stretch than it's going to be. Does it seem? Does the timeline seem to be getting shorter in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually was talking to a group the other day, and I said by 2030. So that's 8 years. But we also said that if it gets to like 2028 and it hasn't happened, I'm going to start pushing it to 2035.
Right.
So, ask me in a couple of years, I guess, because your mileage may vary, as they always say. But I think that everybody feels this. The polls bear this out. Everybody feels this. People on the left feel this too. I mean, I spend a little bit of time. I try not to too much, because I have to take a shower because of the evil and stupidity after I read any kind of non-curated leftist feed. That is obviously things like CNN and so on I don't watch, but that's curated leftism. Though I was noticing apparently CNN changed the color shifted the backdrop of Biden's speech during the speech to pink. Wow. Some producer, I'm sure, was like, this is not a good look for, and so they color shifted it. My point is they're curated media. But if you look at the unhinged left media, whether that's Twitter or other things, they feel it too. I mean, everybody feels it, that something wicked this way comes. Obviously, what that wicked thing is perceived differently, not just between left and right, but among people on the right. But it's just so many historical parallels to this kind of fracturing of a society. But it's also true there's a wide variation in what that means. And I always come back to this, that until people feel that they can change their situation by participating in some form of social unrest, people will continue on in their kind of dullard inertia way until that day when something bigger happens. That's just the way it works.
You mentioned it earlier, and this is a theme that I've discussed with you before too. I think it's a silver lining. It leads me to have optimism. Is how incredibly stupid the elites that run everything are right now. And I think if you look back over time, it was more destructive and more dangerous to people that have beliefs like you and I do when the elites are smart and when the propaganda being pushed is well done propaganda. That's the fact that we can all see this and how absurd it is now. The lady that speaks for the Biden administration and how ridiculously uneducated she seems, or educated in today's terms, I suppose. But and I did an episode last week. Basically, my guest was saying the empire has no clothes now because it's so obvious. Don't you think that's a good thing at this point?
Absolutely. I always say I'm an optimist, and that's a weird thing to say because I predict there'll be a variety of hard times in the immediate future. But if you're going to have hard times, you might as well get them over with. And obviously, that's an easy thing to say, a glib thing to say, but when you have to personally pay the price, whatever that price may be, it's not going to seem like it was such a good idea. But the reality is that you can't go on doing stupid forever. So you need to squeeze the stupidity out of the system one way or another. I think there's no chance whatsoever, and I say this frequently, but I think it's extremely important to repeat, but there's no chance whatsoever that the current regime is going to last indefinitely, squeezing us like it was 1930s Stalinism, which was run by hard, competent men.
Yes.
That's it. I mean, leaving aside the other factors that are different in America, which is obviously the love of liberty and freedom in their traditional senses of ordered liberty and freedom is vastly greater here than in any other country, and of course the elephant in the room, which people don't like to talk about, is the enormous amount of weapons in private hands and the fact that the people who actually fight in the military are overwhelmingly unlikely to fight for the regime. I mean, there's just no universe in which the Brandon-esque vision of his stormtroopers breaking down people's doors and dragging them away is going to come about. I mean, that's certainly their vision. I mean, they're very open about it in the kind of less curated areas of leftism, but that's always been true. My favorite example, which I think we may have talked about, is the Finnish Civil War in 1919, when the Finnish left, against the better judgment of the smarter people there, decided that since the right had won an election, it was time to start a war, and they got their ass handed to them in 3 months. If something like that were to happen here, which seems pretty likely, certainly if Trump were to win in 2024, you might not have exactly the same outcome, but you'd be more likely to have, I think, a fracture in the country, like state by state kind of split. But what we're not going to have is the jackboot of Brandon stamping on us forever. I mean, he might be able to stamp on us for 2 weeks, but I'm not even sure he'd make 2 weeks. Where's the power? I mean, fat bureaucrats and some 95 IQ FBI agents who think that 150 IQ FBI agents. I mean, these people are all clowns. I mean, not 100%. There's a few people who aren't clowns. Like James Carville occasionally pops up saying, he's a smart guy. He's like, yeah, I'm a commie, but y'all are stupid. This is not the way to get my desired communist state. But people like that have been shunted to the side. Carville's a cishet white man. I mean, in a southern. I mean, I'm pretty sure nobody in the Democratic Party listens to James Carville anymore, which they really. I mean, people like that are the way to get real power, but there's not enough of them to pull it off.
Do you think the rank and file right are starting to become, maybe red-pilled is the term, but more knowledgeable and understand that the institutions of, let's say, the military and the FBI aren't on their side at this point? Because that's one of the breaking, it's like they just couldn't, up until maybe now, I'll get your opinion, but they couldn't let that go. Like the myth of well, you got to support the FBI and all the military and our, support our men. The institutions of those two aren't on your side if you're a man on the right. Do you think that that's becoming more widely known?
I would say so, but it's also true that there's very large contingents of people who are genetically referred to as barstool sports kind of guys.
Yeah.
They like sports ball. They like abortion because, Dave Portnoy likes abortion because, that allows us to continue the misbehavior that has become the norm for men over the past couple of decades and so on. So I think while certainly a larger percentage of men and the men who are paying attention, the educated men who watch Counterflow, they are all getting it. And I think weirdly, that includes my guess is, I can't prove this obviously, is that the people who have realized what time it is are increasingly those whom the left would rely on to execute their dictates, particularly men in the military.
Yes.
And you're substituting some fat furry in your infantry brigade. It's just not going to work out for you if you actually want your infantry brigade to do something when the non-com who has spent 15 years in there decides that he's had enough of the furries being pushed down on him. So I think, but on the younger side, they're younger than 15 years of military service, I think the men who are leaders or could have leadership material within them are the most likely to know what time it is. And the kind of mass of people who are like, give me another beer, watch some sports ball. Like everything, big social change is led by an elite.
Yeah.
And barstool sports people are still men, though lower testosterone on average than they used to have, sadly, for a variety of reasons. I think many of them unclear. But those people will follow along when the time comes, whatever that time may be or how it may manifest itself. So the short answer to your question is yes. I think that every day that passes, a significant percentage of young men, which is really all that matters in this context, in the context of social change. I mean, what young women think is of some importance, what middle-aged men think is of modest importance, and what middle-aged women think is of zero importance. Just as a matter of course, I mean, except for voting, but I'm talking when you're extra, let's say extra voting, outside of voting kind of things. And suburban women and what they call awfuls, affluent white female liberals are a curse upon the land. And so to the extent they have opinions, they should be told to shut up. So what matters is what young men think. And that's kind of implied in your question. That young men are very clearly coming around. And you see this in things, I mean, obviously the classic example of this is things like BAP, Bronze Age pervert. I don't resonate with BAP. I'm in some ways a BAP fan. In some ways, I'm like, that's not going to work out for society. But the fact is that kind of vitalism, a term that was occasionally got off prominence a year or two ago and is still around, is something that young men seek, and they can get their vitalism from Bronze Age piracy. They can get their vitalism from orthodoxy. They can get their vitalism from, or they can get their vitalism from the old-fashioned way, which is fighting people. And so they'll get it one way or the other at the end of the day. It's not. It doesn't matter that the surveys say that 40% of Gen Z people or whatever identify as homosexual. I'm like, that's just stupid. At the end of the day, the natural tendencies of young men are going to come out, and the natural tendencies of young men are going to crap all over people like Dark Brandon. That's the way it is.
And a lot of what your advice for young people details is you're kind of talking to young men for the most part, and women, but largely men. If a young man or a parent of a young man asked you, let's say the kid's 16, 17, something like that, what are your thoughts on him joining the military at this point?
Yeah, my thoughts are highly negative. That is, the military has, even in the past couple of years, become a much less hospitable place to white men, and probably to Black or Hispanic men who are not down with the kind of program of which is frankly a program put forth by a minority of leaders in the Black and Hispanic community. But no young man, but especially white young men, is going to find a receptive environment in the military. That is, no normal young man, if he's a tranny or what have you. And yes, it's true that he may get a job. He will get a job and maybe paid money. And yes, it's true on a more kind of spicy level that he'll get some amount of military training. But the reality is that most people who join the military, unless you end up in some not special forces necessarily, but some branch where you are the recipient of some more specialized training, you don't get any knowledge of the military. You can't pick up in a couple weekends of practice and reading books and talking to people who know how to engage in military operations. So you don't really learn any meaningful training that you couldn't pick up otherwise. In most cases, I mean, certainly some people in the military at a rarefied level do things that are incomprehensible to someone like me, middle-aged guy who could probably do 10 pull-ups if I was, if I had a bunch of coffee, I might be able to pull off 10 pull-ups, maybe, probably more like 6. But there's no reason to join the military in the short run. In the long run, there's no reason to join the military because it doesn't give you anything that will help you on the other side of a societal fracture. That is, if you're in the military and things break badly, you may be asked to do things that you don't want to do, and so you have to desert or engage in bad behavior. And you're not going to be. It doesn't make you more likely to be part of some future elite that replaces today's elite. That you manage to be a corporal or a second lieutenant in some branch of the military. Nobody really cares. What's going to matter for tomorrow's elite is what your talents are and what you did in the troubles, not what rank you held in the former military of the former United States or the rump United States or whatever it turns out to be. So I just can't see any benefit whatsoever for a young man to join the military, especially because there's plenty of other jobs that you can get that will make you money and so on. So, I mean, historically, for example, a lot of men joined the British military in the 18th and 19th centuries because otherwise they would starve, and so people were offering you 20 shillings to sign up, and so people did that. But that is not something that's operative today. There's plenty of other ways to make money. So why would you join the military of the global homo regime? There's just no upside.
Mm-hmm. And then this seems like a more obvious answer, but I'm going to ask you about college and universities. I still, even right now, when I talk to a friend that's got a teenager and they say, we're trying to figure out which university they're going to get in, it makes me uneasy. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I want to say, no, don't do this. I understand there are some areas where you still need a college education. I don't know, maybe engineering and some of the sciences and things like that. But boy, it makes me uneasy when I hear that because it doesn't seem like a good idea in my opinion. I'm biased. I only went to a junior college. I'm a firefighter, so I didn't need to get a progressive education. What are your thoughts on kids entering college at this point?
Yeah, I think it's on balance, with some exceptions, a terrible idea. And this is not really an original point, but you're working backward. If you want to be a doctor and you have what it takes to be a doctor and you're willing to put up with the debilities of the medical profession, that is, you have to agree to insane things. You have to not complain about abortion training. You have to not complain about underqualified doctors who are there killing people because of affirmative action. Medicine is an extremely valuable skill. My own grandfather was a refugee in Germany after the war. He was Hungarian, and he had three small daughters and a wife to support. But he was a doctor, so he was. The Germans were pretty organized with respect to refugees, but he was able to trade medical services for food, and then ultimately to get a job working for UNRWA, the United Nations relief organization, as a doctor. But if he had been a lawyer or he had a gender studies degree, his kids would have starved. So there's a lot to be said for having medical skills, both for yourself and for your local community. Everybody needs doctors. I mean, there's no way around that. So if people on the right don't go into medicine, that's probably bad. Though we can work around that maybe ultimately as fashions change and other people who are not explicitly right fill the gaps. But still, there's a lot to be said. So you have to go to college for that. And as you say, you have to go to college for something you probably have to go to college for engineering and so on. But the fact is, most people don't go to college for those kind of hard sciences or technical things. They just don't. I mean, and even things like computer science, you don't need to go to college. I mean, it's perfectly feasible in a thing like computer science, which is technically a hard science, to teach yourself, to learn on the job. And if you're really good at it, that's probably a better way to do it, because your talent is still recognized in the computer science world more so than credentials. I mean, maybe it's the case that if you go to Stanford, it's easier to get a job, and certainly you probably get to know people, but that's the exception rather than the rule. If you go to Purdue University, where my father taught, and you study computer science, I don't think that getting a degree in that will necessarily make it easier for you to get a job than taking an alternate path. I mean, it makes it easier for you to get a job than if you do nothing and you know nothing and you learn nothing and try to get a job. But if you take the alternate ways of showing your skill set, there's certifications and all sorts of ways that a talented computer science person can show his worth. And so most people, like I went to school 30 years ago, just over 30 years ago now. I started off in medicine and then dropped that and ended up in history. I would not recommend that anybody get a history degree today. You can't get a job with it. It's all obviously completely ideologized. And then I went to law school, which is an even worse idea. I mean, law school is like the worst possible idea ever. So the big problem is kind of the one you identify. People just can't let go, especially parents just can't let go of this idea that it's socially awkward to say, my son's not going to college. He's going to be a plumber. He's going to be a firefighter. He's going to go ranch. Who knows, right? I mean, I did a review a while ago of Jean-Michel Fortier's book, The Market Garden. And he's a Canadian guy who, if he didn't go to college, he just started a market garden, that is a small farm for selling stuff to market. But if a parent has to tell his peers in most areas of the professional managerial elite today that, then they're like, the conversation probably trails off, and the other people wonder, is there something wrong with your kid? Or, worse, are you some kind of, weird right winger who doesn't think, who thinks college is a nasty finishing school for feminization? I mean, so there's a real social cost to the parents to not sending kids to college. And there's also a real social cost is perhaps the wrong word, but if you're the kid, the going to college and getting a history degree or a gender studies degree, because the system is so jacked up, you can still get a job, not in history, but if you have the right politics and so on, you can get a job at some NGO and ultimately get your loans forgiven and all this kind of stuff. And then that seems, if you're off the right political bent, well, I'm saving the world, and I'm getting paid $60,000 a year. And yeah, sure, I live with 6 roommates in the outer borough of New York, but that's better to a lot of kids than doing something that's open-ended, uncertain, may ultimately get them more money, but requires them to learn a set of skills that is not easy to learn, that no one in their family may have achieved. I mean, for example, working the trades is not some kind of magic, wonderful thing. If you're the low person on the totem pole working a trade, I mean, that's very tough. You get hazed. This is. It's not like. But if you're a gender studies person, you've seen these TikTok videos where people work on LinkedIn and they never do any work and they just travel around Chicago and relax. They get lattes and so on. If you're working a trade, I mean, that's not where your life is, and so it's very hard to make that choice as a kid. I remember I quit my law job when I was early 30s, and I moved back to Indiana, and I was looking for a business to buy, but I ran a cabinetry making business. Just started a cabinetry making business on the side. I did a lot of installing of built-in cabinetry, bookcases, and what have you. But it was fascinating to me because, I'd been to like this big firm Chicago lawyer. I hung out in all these rarefied areas. And of course, when you're a lawyer, you're always in like mergers and acquisitions law, the accountants are the low men on the totem pole and the lawyers are slightly above them. The important people are the people who have the money. So it wasn't like I was all important as a lawyer, but it is a certain rarefied thing. You go out to, you feel important. You go out to expensive dinners that other people pay for. And then all of a sudden, I'm basically in the middle of the winter using a miter saw outside with a bunch of other trades guys. It was weird because, they related to me in a way that was radically different than if I had been the lawyer, right? And so it was real. And I've had a variety of exposure to blue collar work over time, and ultimately my business revolved around blue collar workers. So I have a lot of that kind of not resonance, because obviously I talk hoity-toity and all that, but it's it was actually an eye-opening experience to be a trades guy. But that's a long way off actually from my main point, which is that picking up a trade as an 18-year-old isn't an easy thing to do for many, and it can be physically draining and damaging. I mean, if you become a mason, I mean, I know a bunch of masons in their 40s, and they're not doing great after 30 years, or well, not 30 years, say 20 years of lifting 12-inch concrete CMU units. I mean, that's not great. So I don't think that there's an easy way, an easy answer. I mean, I think there is an easy answer, which is don't go to college unless you have those specific reasons. But that doesn't mean the alternate path is easy. And I think biggest thing that kids should remember if they want to be part of the future elite. So this is, some kids would always end up in the trades because that's what they do. That's what they're interested in. Like I have a nephew who he wants to be a blacksmith. That's what he wants. I mean, he's in college, but barely, because he didn't want to go, and he's going to be a blacksmith. And so, but if you don't want to be that, if you want to be part of the future elite, if you're kind of an egghead, to accept what I'm selling, you have to believe that I'm right, that everything is going to be different soon. And, I don't want to, people, I don't really care because everyone has to make his own decision, but it would be embarrassing if 20 years from now, Dark Brandon is still in power, and all the kids who didn't go to college are starving and doing, I don't know, whatever, working in Dark Brandon's plantations of marijuana or something that he sells to the people to keep them stupid. It's hard to say, but I think the answer is clear. It's just the future path is so opaque that it's a hard sell.
I got to tell you guys about a few new products over at our favorite CBD store. That's, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The first thing I'm going to tell you about that's brand new over there is these THCV gummies. There's 10 milligrams of THCV per gummy and 10 gummies per jar. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with this THCV. Some people call it diet weed. It's very good for intermittent fasters. THCV helps suppress or dull your appetite, which, of course, a little bit unlike regular THC that, as you probably know, or at least you've heard, can give you the munchies. THCV helps promote energy, unlike regular THC, which of course makes you feel kind of mellow. This is legal, legal under the Farm Bill. So thank you, Farm Bill. The second thing I want to tell you about that's new over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their full spectrum nano CBD soft gels. These have the perfect amount of CBD with THC. 25 milligrams of CBD and 0.27 milligrams of THC per soft gel. Their everyday formula brings your body back to homeostasis and adds this nice extra layer of chill. I like that. I think you do too. A lot of us need that now and again, or maybe every day. Nanotechnology allows better absorption into your body, even better than their other products, which was already amazing. Again, this has a calming effect and it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. And of course, like the other stuff, it's legal under what? The Farm Bill. Thank you, Farm Bill. It's legal. I would not get you guys in trouble. Go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got a lot of great products. I talk about them all the time. The massage oil. They've got the sleep bundle. They got nano CBD soft gels, CBD bath bombs, which are amazing. Gummies, tinctures, all of that stuff. Of course, for my French bulldogs, Lux and George, the pet tinctures and the pet gummies. All of these things are over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Oh yeah, did I tell you about the cool menthol sports cream? Of course I have before. It's the best sports cream in the world. I get reviews from customers on this all the time. That's the number one thing I like from this company. And they've got all of these great things. Over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get a promo code because Carlos and Vanessa, the owners, love this show and they want to help out the listeners of this show. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order. Go give them business and in turn, give me business. Now, let's get back to the show. Do you think we will be at a point where someone attending a typical 4-year university, getting something like history or gender studies, do you think we're going to end up at a point where that's looked down upon and businesses will not want those people working?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's analogous to a kind of hyper-technical thing, which most people don't know, which is that some people get a combined law and JD degree and MBA degree. That's actually a terrible idea. It seems like it gives you options, but businesses look down on that because lawyers have bad characteristics for business. And it just, so that actually makes it very hard to get a business job. And so it's a waste of money. So on that, on a much larger scale, I think it's definitely going to be true. I mean, I think the economy is going to be largely reset to squeeze out the stuff that is fake. So only the people who can actually provide value are going to be given jobs. That doesn't mean that someone who got a gender studies degree can't provide value, but it's like denazification. You have to prove why you were wrong then, and now you can be a productive member of society rather than the kind of person who will cause trouble within a workplace and cry when your performance review isn't adequate because in gender studies, they told you that the patriarchy was oppressive, and here's an example of it because I did not get a glowing review. And that kind of thing isn't going to fly in the future. So I think, but also, I mean, I would expect in the future society, future economy, men will be explicitly preferred for all job positions, except for a few that are kind of naturally suited to women. And to the extent that gender studies degrees are largely held by women, I would expect most of those people would be in the workforce simply because the BS jobs won't exist anymore. Men with families will be given preference in jobs that provide real value. And so in a sense, you don't have to openly discriminate against gender studies people because they'll naturally filter out of the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of women, what advice would you give a young woman, let's say 16, 17, who's basically comes to you, Charles, I don't know what to do. The paths are varied. There's crazy stuff out there. Do I go to college? What would you suggest for a young female?
Well, I have a 17-year-old daughter. So.
Well, look at that.
Well, the answer is that it depends on, as always, on that person's personality. My daughter's primary interest is in teaching young children. That's what she wants to do. So that makes life easy, right? She comes to me and she says, I want to teach young children. And there's different paths for that. You could go to this couple, it's a select group of colleges which make sense for that, or there's other alternatives as well. And of course, going to college in her case is, if she goes to college, is also largely an opportunity for her to find a husband, another thing she's interested in doing. So I'm fortunate in that, not so much because of my good management, perhaps because of my wife's good management of our children. The children have not kind of gone off the rails, at least not yet. I pray they continue to stay on the rails. But I think that if you had a daughter, or if you're advising a relative, not necessarily just a daughter, I have another friend who has a couple daughters, and the mother is very proud that she's raised fierce girls. Fierce used to be the adjective used for things like harpies and was regarded as the extreme vice for women. And it is an extreme vice for women. That is, no man wants a fierce woman. I mean, even if, obviously you see things like in the movies or in the laughable new Lord of the Rings thing on Amazon, the girl boss, swords warrior, wielding a sword. That kind of stuff is kind of what people think of when they think of fierce. But in reality, fierce functionally means being inheritant. That is, having contempt for your man, not being faithful to your man, not uplifting your man, and just generally being the kind of woman who is not just no man would want, but is a curse upon society. So if you have a daughter like that, you have a problem on your hands. And so if your daughter comes to you and says, well, I really want to study engineering, now you have to parse out if that person is really interested in engineering or is any traditional male-dominated career is enormous amounts of resources are put from earliest age into encouraging women to go into it and denigrating men. That through a variety, any number of mechanisms, obviously direct, endless scholarships and camps and so on, just for girls. constant lies about not non-existent female accomplishments like astronauts or engineers or what have you, just made up stories. I mean, I pay attention to this stuff because I have 5 kids, and it's like if you go to any like an astronaut exhibit, the every celebrated person picked out, highlighted as a woman or sometimes a Black person. I'm sure they've added trannies if there's been any tranny astronauts, and so if your daughter really wants to be an engineer, you should probably discourage her, because really women shouldn't be in the engineering business. It's not really a fit career for women. It'll likely scare off men, so she'll end up being a why-not. I mean, speaking of why-nots, one of my aunts who died 2 years ago, and I was very close to her, my father's sister, she was super smart, and she got a PhD and an MD from Harvard. It was Radcliffe back then, but same thing. And her entire life was a disaster because she refused to marry the woman that, not this one, sorry, bad slip. She was engaged, about to be engaged, and said she moved across the country because she wanted to be a pioneering woman in science. And so she was bitterly unhappy her whole life and became kind of paranoid and so on and so forth. And, her other relatives in the family have now retconned this into that she was paranoid and sad, not because she made bad choices and alienated the things from her life that she really wanted, but because the men were after her whole career because she was so bold. I mean, it's just so vomitous. And so that's a long way of saying that basically women shouldn't be in engineering. I wouldn't exclude women. I think socially, women who choose careers that are both more fit for men, and frankly, the men are better at and totally dominate the upper end because of the statistical distributions of intelligence and other talents, as well as drive and ambition. Women should be socially discouraged from entering any of those professions, including engineering. Now, that may be a tough sell to some people's 17-year-old daughters because they're propagandized the whole time, especially if you haven't made the right moves in raising them. Therefore, you're probably best off guiding them into something where they're not going to be propagandized, or they'll be propagandized as little as possible. I'm not sure what that is, though. I mean, I think every college is going to any mainstream college if the child is not already formed in a very concrete way to resist those influences. I mean, everybody knows that there's endless horror stories of people who think their daughters and sons are well-formed, and they go off to college and they come back ruined.
Yep.
Like the first year, like mutilate themselves and do all these. So I don't really, I guess this is a long way of saying I don't have great advice. I don't know, ship your kid off to a camp in Alaska. I don't know. There's got to be a better answer, but really the fundamental answer is that you need to work harder to end the structures of society that cause these problems, and then there won't be a problem. Maybe there'll still be a problem for you in the next couple of years, but your children's children at least won't have this problem, or your younger children. I have several younger children, and I don't expect any of them college to be around in its current form by the time they get to that age. So I spend no time at all worrying about it. I could be wrong about that, but I literally just kind of snicker to myself when it occurs to me, maybe I should think about their college. I just snicker and say, well, that's a problem for future Charles, and future Charles's world is going to be a lot different than the world today. But I hope I'm right about that.
You used a term a while ago, why not? What is that?
Oh, sorry. Maybe that's not in as common usage as I thought. So why not is the term you hear sometimes for the unmarried, childless aunt that some children have, where she never got married, she never had children, she chose her career, so now she drinks all the time and says how fun her life is and how she wants to be the fun aunt, and really she's just sad and lonely.
Yikes! Okay,
that's the why not? Yeah, why not is Spencer Clavin, who's the one of the editors of The American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. I'm not sure what his title is, but he's an excellent writer and speaker. He's very good at the quips, and he once had a quip: "The girl boss to wine on pipeline." Which I thought was an excellent summation of what happens to your daughters if you let them be propagandized.
What about marriage? for young men, young women. I think maybe I'm in Texas is why, but it's still looked highly upon. The dads I know who have daughters want their daughters to get married fairly quick, but it seems like society and TV and things like that, it's kind of looked down upon at certain points.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on marriage?
Well, I highly recommend marriage. I mean, I've had a very successful marriage, and in fact, in 1 month it'll be our 20-year anniversary.
Nice.
We got married in Chicago, and our plan originally was to do a weekend or something in Chicago, but Chicago is less attractive as a place to hang out than it used to be. So maybe we won't do that. But so I highly recommend marriage. But I got married relatively late. I mean, I was 35 when I got married. And I think that's obviously you have to find the right person, but 35 is undesirably late. I mean, my wife is several years younger than me, 5 years younger than me. So it's not, so we were able to have kids. But if we were both in 35, it would have restricted us having kids. And frankly, we were fortunate to have as many kids as we were able to. And I think that so I think everybody should get married, unless you're going to be a monk or priest or priest or something like that. I mean, there are a few set of people for whom marriage is not an appropriate vocation for one reason or another. But your average normal person should get married and should get married sooner rather than later. And the biggest single obstacle to that, I mean, other than the fact that obviously the dating scene is completely screwed up and Tinder and all those kind of things, I mean, leaving that aside, is everybody has been conditioned not just to have contempt for marriage and to say, I need to have a career and all those kind of things, which are obvious, but to say it needs to be the right time.
Mm-hmm.
It's never, I mean, you have to be financially secure. It's never the right time. I mean, unless like your dad's a Rockefeller and is giving you endless money, and even that is going to cause more problems than it fixes probably in your marriage. But it's never the right time, and you just have to accept that it's going to be easier than you think, and in all likelihood. And yes, it is true that there's two kinds of right time. That is, some of it is it's not the right time because I don't have the money, or I need to get another promotion at work, or I need to accomplish this career goal, or something like that. And the other kind of right time is that this will crimp my lifestyle. That is, either getting married or having children. Like, I like this lifestyle. I want to continue this lifestyle indefinitely. So the former of those is just unwise. It's strategically incorrect decision. And the latter is just, dumb, selfish immaturity that people used to be. Everyone's susceptible to that. It's human nature, but it used to be that you were surrounded by a society that stigmatized you if you were a 29-year-old woman who enjoyed partying and was not interested in getting married, and probably stigmatized you a little bit older as a man. I mean, obviously every society varies in what's regarded as the socially desirable age to get married. You don't want it to be 14, but you don't want it to be 35 either. And so it used to be these things were socially coerced. So in this, as in so many other things, we need to bring back stigma as a virtue. That is, society needs to stigmatize behaviors that are bad. And that obviously has social costs, but the social costs are as nothing compared to the social cost of not having stigma. So if I had a single political platform, it would be bring back stigma. In the question of when to get married, as well as in everything else.
People in our circles, I hear this a lot, and I try to discourage it, but I hear it. I don't want to have kids. I don't want to bring kids into this world. It's too crazy. You saw Dark Brandon's speech last night. I don't want to bring kids into a mad world that we're in. What's your argument to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, you don't have kids. Who's going to shoot the guns? I mean, you got to have some help on the firing line. But leaving that aside, I mean, I don't. It's funny you say that, because I have not heard a lot in our circles. I always thought that was more of a kind of enviro freak kind of. I like global. I want to bring it in right. And like I think many of these things are media created, but like these soy beta men who are like, I got a vasectomy because Roe v. Wade was overturned, kind of crap. I'm like, oh my God,
I've seen that too.
You're such a loser. You need to put to work on a galley, like chained to a galley, like in Ben Hur. It'll man you up, like increase your testosterone 3 years on the galley. Anyway, though if you have the vasectomy, it's too late. So testosterone will go nowhere. But I think that I don't get that, honestly. I'm like, and it's kind of silly on a historical basis. I mean, 99% of human history has been one horrible thing after another, even like societies that were well run and generally good, like the High Middle Ages. I mean, infant mortality was 30% or whatever. I mean, if you take that perspective, you're never going to have children. It's a cousin to the question of it's never the right time.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk. I mean, when my wife and I were having additional kids, we, for whatever reason, we had a gap of several years, and we started having kids again. And we're very fortunate because we were very interested in more kids. And but when we were talking about it, and one of the points I made was, and this a little bit maudlin or downbeat or something, but the more kids you have, the more chances for tragedy there are. And it doesn't help when you have some tragedy that you have other kids, you have lots of kids. Every tragedy is its own unique thing. And that's just the way it is. And fortunately, we've been extremely blessed. We've had no tragedies, all of the children very healthy, but sooner or later, something's going to come for the family, hopefully for the parents before the children, because that's the way the world works. And if you spend your whole life worrying about it, then that's just no way to live. There's a Grimm's fairy tale. I think it's Clever Elsa or something, which is these are medieval German fairy tales originally about a girl who is sent down to the cellar to fetch something, and she doesn't come back, and they send more people after, and nobody comes back, and finally they go back down there, and she's staring at the ceiling. She's created this chain of events in her head, like, what if that fell down, and what if it hit me in the head, and she's convinced all these people to think along these lines. And so eventually, I think the grandma comes in and slaps them all around and says, "Shut up and get back to work." But that's basically what you need to do. You need to shut up and get back to work. If you're not going to have children for that reason, it shows I think a poor grasp of both history and reality.
Do you have a way of convincing your kiddos to, let's say, disassociate with certain people that they would consider friends at the moment? Because I see teenage kiddos that hang out with, my friend wants to be an activist or wants to march in the pro-life, pro-choice pro-choice thing. Yeah, right. Or wear the pink hat, and talk about the glass ceiling being shattered. Do you see that amongst teens where they have friends that are into quote unquote activism and they want to work for change and all of these kind of empty slogans?
Well, a lot of my family, again, I don't know whether it's good management or good luck or, God's grace, but, my kids have turned out, I mean, they're not carbon copies of me, but really that would be frightening if they were carbon copies of me. But we have no such concerns. We pulled the older ones out of public school some years ago, and then we put them in a private school, and we pulled them out of that when it overnight turned into a anti-white hatred fest, and they finished out at finishing out at a classical Christian academy kind of thing, which is very good. And then the littler ones have always gone there, and the little ones lead it's not exactly a sheltered life. I mean, they lead a 1950s life. I purged all their books and bought 1950s books. Nice. They run around our property with knives and air rifles, and they go to the emergency room intermittently for cutting themselves and things like that. So I'm not worried about them at all. And the big ones have a little bit more of they don't have social media, but they're on Discord servers and so on. And we watch that, and we watch it less as they get older. But we've never had any real concerns there. But the honest answer is that if we're in charge, and if we didn't like their friends, we would simply cut them off from their friends. I mean, and there wouldn't be any argument about it. And that would be, there might be argument, but it would be a completely ineffective argument. And even among people around here in Indiana, where my wife keeps up with a lot of other mothers and so on, a lot of other mothers are unwilling to do that. They're like, well, my darling little whatever wants to do X. And we basically just don't care what little darling wants to do if we don't regard it as good for them or good for the family. The end. I mean, fortunately, now it's easy to say because we've never had any huge fights over that. But if one of our children announced that, here's my friend and he wants to be an activist, and he thinks Clarence Thomas is should be shot because abortion is great. I mean, that our kid would never see that kid again. I mean, it would be forbidden from having any contact with that kid, and then we would tell the parents to shove off. But we're much more aggressive than most people. So my advice to people is to take an aggressive approach. That is, you're in charge. Parents are in charge. This bizarre idea that, obviously when your kid's 20, that's not true. But if you've done this for long enough, you maximize your chances of your kid turning out good. And obviously, time and chance happen to us all. I mean, and anything could happen, right? For example, one concern is always you tell them to get married early, but they end up with someone who is out of sync with your values. I mean, what do you do then? I mean, well, I haven't faced that problem, fortunately, but that's always a possibility. But you do the best you can, but the best you can involves telling your children the way it's going to be, starting early and continuing late, basically.
One of the things you've touched upon here briefly, but you write about and talk about is the PME, as you call it, the professional managerial elite. I would say that that's a feminized industry, if we can call it an industry at all.
Yes.
But that's clearly what's running the country for the most part, is the PME. Can you talk about the grip on power that the PME basically has, just in a way that my audience can kind of grasp it? A lot of them understand this, but you articulate it well, and I'd like you to kind of touch on that.
Sure. I mean, the professional managerial elite, you can look at this a couple of different ways. And this has been a lot on my mind too, because I've been reading and I'm going to have a review of Nima Parvini's The Populist Delusion, which is kind of an update of James Burnham's The Machiavellians. It basically revolves around what's sometimes called elite theory. That is, it's never true, of course, everybody knows that the people rule directly, so who does rule? And so you will typically have you will always have some form of elite. We have what is frequently called the professional managerial elite. Managerial kind of comes from James Burnham's talk about managerialism, and professional meaning people with not that they're professional managers, but that their careers are what were historically regarded as the professions. So traditionally that was like law, medicine, accounting, things like that. That's kind of broadened now, where profession is kind of analogous to what people used to call white collar work, and is heavily dominated not by the traditional professions, but what might be thought of as NGO type work. That is, you're working for LinkedIn, doing that stupid like stuff I mentioned earlier with the sorry about the dog in the background. Where you're doing nothing all day of any value, but it's white collar. There's nothing dangerous or dirty about it. You drink lattes and chai teas and stuff all day long, and what have you. So that group of people is hang on a second. Sorry, it's like, Oxen, I'm all around me. My infrastructure is collapsing. I apologize. So the
You have a cup.
gosh darn it. Hang on a second.
No worries.
Maybe you can cut this out later. I'll just throw that phone over there. So the professional managerial elite today is both useless in the sense of it doesn't add value to the society, but ever growing. And this is, I don't know if you've ever read a guy named Peter Turchin, who wrote Ages of Discord, which is a cyclical analysis of how, hang on one second here. Sorry about that. So the professional managerial elite, not just Peter Turchin, wrote this book, Ages of Discord, and it's a cyclical analysis, or purports to be a cyclical analysis of how societies develop and then fracture. It's very interesting. It's a fair amount of attention in right circles, though Turchin's not himself a right or left guy, he's just a historian. But he talks a lot about elite overproduction as a hallmark of societies that are on the verge of fracture. That is, the young people go into life and follow the traditional avenues for entering the elite, but there are many more of them than there used to be who expect to become elite, but there are now more elite positions. And so what you get is a ever-growing amount of people who feel that they're qualified to be elite, but they're not paid like they're elite. They don't have the actual influence of being an elite, but they're in jobs that are regarded as elite because they're white collar and what have you, and they look good on Twitter or something. I mean, you can define this various ways. So the professional managerial elite is bad because it sucks up all these people. It indoctrinates them in a variety of left-wing ways, and because the left is in power, and so therefore they control the money flow for most of these positions. And it leads to a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction for these people while they lord it over the rest of us. So roughly speaking, probably 20% of society it constitutes the elite. Sometimes people divide this into the governing elite and the non-governing elite, that latter group being bigger. And so 15% of it, 15% of as opposed to 5%, something like that. But the professional managerial elite is bad for society because it's the group that dictates what's going on in our society, how money is spent. For example, the fact that we blow all this money by sending it to the Ukrainians, for example, is dictated by the professional managerial elite. Nobody else is allowed a say in this. And historically, ultimately, what changes society is when the elite is removed, what is sometimes called the circulation of elites. That's a euphemism for removal of the existing elites. And then they go off and either they go into exile or they get new jobs or what have you. Or worst case scenario, you have an actual civil war and all of a sudden there's fewer people around for the positions. But that's the kind of challenge that we're facing, which is we are governed by a rotten professional managerial elite that governs both in their own interests, which is the traditional definition of a tyranny, but also badly, like running the country into the ground. That's just no recipe for, not just no recipe for long-term success, but it's a recipe for disaster in the immediate future, which is, of course, kind of brings it back to where we started with Haywood predicting that disaster is coming in the immediate future, but a disaster that I think we can capitalize on and come out with a much more desirable remade society on the other side.
Well, I got to respect your time and we can wrap here in a second. I guess the topic is advice for young people. Is there anything that you would just off the top of your mind right now say, I haven't said this yet, but here's some major advice that I would give young people at this moment? Anything left?
I probably should have reread my own piece, a recent piece that I wrote on this. Let's see. I think there's one other area that we haven't really covered, which is that one of the upsides of technology is that it is infinitely easier to educate yourself than it used to be. And by educate, I don't mean with an eye to employment, like learning about a trade, or even though you can learn, it's easier with YouTube and so on to learn about trades than it used to be. But everybody needs to educate himself because in most people's cases, the education system is so rotten. So in order to get an education in just what it means to be a good man or a good woman, you need to educate yourself. And by that, I don't mean what people used to focus on a lot, especially on the right, like read the great books and learn. I mean, I don't really care about the great books. I mean, sure, maybe. I mean, if some people that's important, but I mean things that are learn history, learn the reality of things. Don't learn about the 1619 Project. Learn how the reality is that white people made this country. And I don't say that because, like, I don't want black people in this country. Because this is always going to be a society with a lot of different kinds of people. But the reality is that white history is important. Again, that's going to sound bad, but white people are taught to hate themselves. It doesn't mean you should go read whoever. I mean, I don't really follow the kind of freakazoid white nationalist types, but that kind of history is important. Learn about the Middle Ages. Learn about all these things that you're not taught in school. Maybe you want to read a little philosophy along the way, but the fact is philosophy isn't for most people. People always attack me when I say this, like, how can you understand without knowing about Aristotle? I'm like, you can understand just fine without reading any Aristotle. I've never read any Aristotle. I mean, I'm vaguely familiar with some of the things Aristotle said, but I know an awful lot about medieval history, which one is my favorite period. And people say, you can't understand medieval history at all without understanding Aristotle. I'm like, that's just not true. You can understand medieval history because the nature of human beings doesn't change. There, as the Ecclesiastes says, there's no thing new under the sun. So reading, what you want to do is you want to read books that are accurate so you can educate yourself about reality and human nature. And there's also, it's not just books. This, again, technology allows things like YouTube, and it also allows things like this or things like my site. It allows people to be exposed to things that even, say, 20 years ago, you just wouldn't have these opportunities. You couldn't be exposed to these lines of thought. You couldn't follow particular ones that were of interest to you or resonated with you. And maybe you could subscribe to like a snail mail mailing list where you got some guy sent you 8 pages of mimeographed things every 2 months. I mean, that's just, so the young people should not waste their time. And by waste their time, I mean excessive video games, watching porn, watching sports ball all day long. They should instead take their time and use the good things that are inherent in modernity. I mean, there are many upsides to technology. A lot of people on the right are down on technology. And yes, I do think the internet on balance is a net negative, but that doesn't mean you can't get a lot out of the internet and other forms of technology. So it's incumbent on young people, leaving aside college entirely and whether you should join the military, to take actions to improve yourself. Not to know yourself. That's like this egg-headed philosophy thing, but to improve yourself. And how you do that depends on your own talents, inclinations, dispositions. But what you don't want to, every day is a new day. See, as I tell my children, today is the first day of the rest of your life. And now is the time to improve yourself. Even if, let's say you spent 6 years smoking pot and wait, now is the time. Now is the time.
Yeah, well put. How would they find your content out there? Plug away.
So I'm Charles Haywood, and my main writing site is The Worthy House at theworthyhouse.com, where I write on a variety of topics. I occasionally pop up elsewhere. For example, I had a review of a biography of Oliver Cromwell a month or two ago in Chronicles magazine.
Okay.
But I didn't cross-link to it on my site because it was paywalled, and I thought it would be rude to reprint it on my site when they put it in their magazine. So I occasionally pop up other places, but I primarily write at theworthyhouse.com, which is, I will not ask you for any money. And there are no advertisements. There are no subscriptions except free email lists. I don't want your money. It's all free. I encourage you to subscribe and read and comment and do all those good things.
I do too. I encourage that, and I'll link to that in the show notes page for this episode. Charles,
I will note,
yes.
I'm sorry. I will note, it's not just writing. I also do read versions, podcast versions of everything I write, as well as YouTube versions with carefully written subtitles for people who like that sort of thing. So I try to have a variety of media by which people can consume The Worthy House.
Excellent. Charles Haywood, thanks for being here again on Counterflow.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed the chat with none other than Charles Haywood himself. Let's see. I got to promote some stuff, right? The website of my own, counterflowpodcast.com. You can donate to the Mises Mayors Foundation. They are helping my campaign. They're supporting me. And that is over at misesgop.org/Buck. You can help me out there. Follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. Subscribe to the YouTube page. You can watch this on our YouTube page. Just search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. Hit that subscribe button. And if you like this show, if you find some value in it, you're more than welcome to contribute to it. I don't mind contributions. Isn't that crazy? I don't mind them at all. It's over at patreon.com/counterflow. Every single penny I make from that goes right back into the show. I promise you, I'm not going out to fancy dinners on your dime. I'm putting it back into the show, the production, all of it. So until next week, you guys have a great one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.